Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series. We cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are Job 14 and 15. I'm in my son's bedroom here, and he's got this old family portrait in his bedroom. This is him maybe 10 years ago, hanging on my shoulders. These are my two daughters and my wife. Today, we're looking at a man who lost his kids. I can't imagine what it would be like not to have my children around me and my family around me, but that's the state Job was in. So he was in the pits of despair. And Job 14 captures that. He says, let me tell you the days of a man. He says they're full of trouble. We're like flowers that just wither and fade. At least we're not even like trees, he says in verse 7. At least a tree, when you chop it down, it sprouts out again. He's basically saying, my kids would have had a second crack at life. He says, we like water in a lake that just dries up. And then, in fact, he goes on and he gets into a very dark place in verse 13. He says, it would be better that I was be dead. Because he says, if I'm dead, if the grave could just hide me, then, at least my sin wouldn't be counted against me. I wouldn't be enduring all this sort of pain. And he says in verse 17, my offenses, if I died, my offenses would be sealed up in a bag and you would cover my sin. He's sort of admitting now that I don't understand this, but maybe it's just better that I be dead and my offenses bundled into a bag and covered up. And then he goes on to say this, if they had children, he's talking about people in his day, and they are honored, you can't even appreciate it when you're under this sort of agony and pain. He says, and if the offspring are brought low, if they're killed, you don't even see it. It's so mind-numbing is this pain that I'm going through. I mean, we've got to feel for Job. But as I think about this, a family cherished, Job lost it. I think of a man who was a friend of the great evangelist D.L. Moody. His name was Horatio Spafford. Some of you might have heard of him. He lived in the 1870s. A lawyer, owned a massive property portfolio in Chicago. Life was going well for him, believer. And then in 1870, his son, 4-year-old son, died of scarlet fever. The family was thrown into turmoil. In 1871, Chicago fires brushed through Chicago and wiped out his whole property portfolio. So the family was in a pretty bad state. Takes his 3 daughters and his wife down to the docks, buys a ticket to go to the UK, and was about to board the ship with them when he got word that his business needed some attention. So he sends his family on to go and handle the business deal. But tragedy strikes. The ship collides with a naval vessel. 12 minutes, 226 people die. A few days later, he hadn't heard word whether his family had made it. He gets a telegram from his wife, Anna. Saved, alone, what shall I do? He had lost not only his firstborn son to scarlet fever, all 3 of his daughters. What does he do? His wife's alone in the UK, foreign land. He goes down to the docks, hops on a ship. As he's going over the stretch of water where his 3 daughters died, the ship captain says, this is where the ship went down. He goes outside and he writes a song. This is a lawyer. He writes a song. It is well with my soul. It's a man who met Jesus. You can compare Horatio Spafford to Job. Job was the best under the old covenant. Job was the best, trying his best to please God. Horatio Spafford, new covenant, like you and me, have access to God, have not because of our righteousness, but because of what Jesus has done. We have access to the Holy Spirit, access to his comfort. And he was able to write this song. When sorrows like sea billows roll, he must have been thinking about the water washing over his children. Whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Who does that? Who's able to sing over the grave of his kids? Certainly no one in the old covenant. If Job is the finest, impossible. You see, this is what the new covenant does. It gives us access to Jesus. It gives us hope. It gives us our sin. Job was waiting for his sin to be swallowed up in a bag and buried in a bag. Well, our sin has been. It's been put onto the cross. There's no now dividing wall of hostility between us and God. We have access to comfort. We have access to God himself. We have And it's totally unnatural to behave like Horatio Spafford did, but we're able to do so. We're in a different position to Job, and Job took a long time to come to terms with this, and his friends couldn't help him. I mean, chapter 15 is Eliphaz is back on the soapbox, and he just can't get over this. He says, listen, Job, you are, you bad-mouthing God. And he says, and who do you think you are, that you think that you are sinless? This is what he says in verse 14. What are mortals that they can be pure, forceful, that you are righteous? You're not righteous. You know you're not. And he just can't get away from the fact that Job's been punished for his sin. Well, as I look at my family and I try and put myself in Job's shoes, I know it must have been impossible for him. God forbid that anything should happen to you or me like Horatio Spafford or Job. But should it happen, should dark clouds roll in, we don't have to worry that our sin hinders us from God. We can rush into his presence. We can declare in front of him, you've got my soul. You've got my future. God bless you.